So, good afternoon, everybody. This is a site that we're quite familiar with at the moment, and it looks like it's going to be even more familiar as time and a half goes by. My good friend Jules is saying, welcome to the coolest summer for the rest of our lives, is another stark way of putting it. But there we go. So yes, too hot. Of course, sometimes when we've had heat waves and the ground gets baked, what do we get? We get storms and we get floods. Things become too wet. So we're thinking about emergency planning, thinking about getting ourselves and our communities ready for what may be coming down at us. If we're going to talk about heat waves, then we have to talk about floods fairly swiftly afterwards. We have talked about floods at other occasions on these banter sessions. But as I say, be very interested to have the discussion at the end of hopefully a relatively short presentation to see where we go. The national emergency briefing that was given in Westminster Hall in November, which has informed the People's Emergency Briefing film, which is going around the country at the moment. I just picked out these headlines from the different presentations that were made in November. There's the one: if we keep burning fossil fuels, temperatures will keep rising. These are summaries of what was said in November from various professors and other experts around the place. UK getting wetter in winter. If the Gulf Stream goes underwater, we don't get the benefit of it, then we'll have still get heat waves in the summer, but we'll get colder weather in the winter and less food growing days, which is an important issue. And we've already seen some shortage. We had some shortage of tomatoes and lettuces and so forth from North Africa and the Mediterranean last year. So we're going to get some more of those things. So there's a whole host of things coming at us that to be not dwelt on in a way, because there are the people who produce the People's Emergency Filming would like to get all this broadcast on the BBC. But that, to my mind, that's not enough, because people, no point panicking people. There has to be some practical things that people do locally in response to these issues. And that's something where the great collaboration is coming to bring these things together. And the big issue at the moment, I think, is the way we tell them, because there's a lot of polarized debate in the media about these sorts of things I've got on the screen. And I think we need a wellspring of more positive messages of what we do about it, rather than the sort of desperate stuff that we're getting. So looking ahead then, failing to plan is playing to fail, as one of my old bosses said to me once. I didn't much appreciate it at the time, but I now know what he means. Wherever we are living in the country, we know our local geography and our local people, whether we're parish councillors, whether we're part of a community project or whatever. We know we can work with our neighbours and friends, locals, to define not only the risks of what coming down to us, the opportunities that we have to deal with it. Do we have waterways? That's good news, and that can be tricky news if we get sudden floods of downpours. So we can look at those things because we know our local places. There is a UK-wide, actually, not just England and Wales, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, all have resilience forums. The resilience forums do keep templates for emergency planning. They don't seem to actually be in touch with each other very much. There doesn't seem to be a very strong network between these forums. They can provide advice. They can tell us what the sort of generic results generic risks are happening in our counties, in our areas, so they can be sort of good at that. When we produced earlier this year an updated community emergency plan template, and I shared it with 4 resilience forums in East Anglia, I'd better not tell you which ones, but none of them actually replied to me. So one of them was still using the 2016 template that the government produced and haven't updated. And another one was using one from another county. So it's interesting. So resilience forums, I suspect, are not dissimilar to other types of organisation, and that they vary. I'll say no more than that. And there's no escape either. We are our local people. We live where we live. We know who we know, and we have an appreciation of the things that we need to guard against and prepare for. So there's no emergency exit for us, and particularly, of course, if we're a parish or town council, we're there. Okay, so just go through key stages in the community emergency plan. Where I've got a line under thing, that's the links to the information behind this presentation are available through the presentation. Graham will be posting it on our knowledge base very shortly. But there is an emergency plan template that we have. It's posted actually on the Society of Local Council Clerks website at the moment. That links through to it, which but we're going to look at it in a bit more detail rather than just showing you the whole template. So it is accessible. Who are the most vulnerable in our community? This is an interesting question because if we think heat waves, we think very young people, very elderly people. But how is it that we can actually be aware of who they are? How is it that we can find ways of contacting them or being in touch with them or offering them assistance and being aware of how we might reach them in any real emergencies? We've got obviously data protection on the one hand and common decency on another, where we're not really necessarily going to be keeping large mailing lists of people who we think are vulnerable, but there will be other people in our community who are in touch with such organizations. I'm thinking of, toddlers groups, nurseries, other ventures for older people may be able to help us with that, and certainly in terms of getting messages around about that. So we have to be thinking about that as we go forward. So we're going to have an emergency plan. What happens if there's an emergency? There needs to be a group of people, clearly. Doesn't have to be a huge number of people that pull this together. Notionally, somebody from the parish council should be doing this. Notionally, every planning authority has a district emergency planning officer that sends templates to all the parishes and town councils around. That doesn't always seem to happen. And I have to admit, in my own parish where I live, the parish clerk confided me the other day, she hadn't written up our emergency plan yet. So there has to be a group of people that are going to think about this and get together, get some ideas together. So what are we going to do? What are the risks facing us? What about the impact from a heat wave? Of course, we'll all be affecting a heat wave, regardless of our geography. We'll have a heat wave. Floods can happen in different places. I had somebody said to me the other day, "Oh, we're living on a hill. We don't have to worry about floods." I said, "Well, okay, provided that all your services and supplies can get through to you through the waters." Oh, I hadn't thought of that. So we're looking at what are the impacts are likely to happen, whether it's from floods, bad weather of all kinds, heat waves. What are the risks that we understand? And as I say, our resilience forum can help us with some of that locally, and there's lots of examples in the template. What do we do about it in advance? How can we prepare in advance for these risks that we've identified? And what do we do when they actually happen? So we're preparing for advanced preparation, what we actually do when it happens, when it's flooding, when we've got 40 degrees or whatever it is. And bear in mind, there needs to be likely to be a bit of a recovery period afterwards, depending on, of course, how long these emergencies last. I mean, we've had 4 or 5 days of very high heat, for example, recently. So those are the where are we going? Right, okay. So what have we got that can help us with that? What are the local skills? Do we have? What people do we have? What resources do we have that can help us when we're dealing with these emergencies, either in advance or at the time? What about places of safety? This is a particular thing in many community emergency plans. If we've got car accidents, we've got any kind of thing, where can people go and feel safe? In terms of heat wave in my village, the 15th century parish church is probably almost certainly the coolest place to be. But where are these places that can be used? And of course, we then need to make sure that the people who are operating those buildings are happy for them to use it in this way. An emergency happens, who do we speak to? Who are you going to call? How do we get in touch with each other? Bearing in mind, I put communications in brackets there because one of the emergencies that might happen might affect our phone systems. It might affect our mobile phones even. How do we actually make sure that we can speak to each other, even if there's a sort of breakdown in those digital communications? Of course, BT are busy putting us all together into the digital world, whether we like it or not. Landlines are not going to be operating quite so well. So we'd be sort of thinking about that. Power cuts, of course, will have a big effect on our phones if they're just linked into the web. What about organizations that can help? We're thinking about not going to be doing it all ourselves. This is about gathering the resources, getting people together locally. We know what we're going to be preparing for. We have an idea what we might do, who's going to help with that. And certainly, in terms of producing a plan, it would be foolish to put it to bed without speaking to our local emergency services, fire, ambulance, police, whatever it is, sharing them with what we've got so that they know about it. They may have some things they want to suggest, but they need to know also that we have such a plan and that there are people that they can be in touch with about it. So that's a quick rundown of what the process and stages of a community emergency plan. So if we look at a bit more detail, here's an example. This is from the actual template that the links to that we've produced from the Great Collaborations on the SLCC website. So what's the impact on the community? How can we prepare for it and action when it happens? The link you've got at the top there is from the government's Prepare campaign. So a lot of the information that we've got here, we've taken from that. This is the kind of information we feel should be on an emergency plan template so that people can have some starter for 10 as to what the issues might be and what they might begin to think about doing. So yes, increased risks of overheating, dehydration, heat exhaustion, and heat stroke, absolutely. Disruption to essential services. Obviously, heat waves can affect power cuts. There have been parts of the country that did have power cuts due to the heat wave in recent times. I think I'm not sure where. I think there are some places in the country already that have water restrictions this summer, and higher risks of wildfire. So, going back to our vulnerable people, how do we know people can think about heat exhaustion? Think about it in advance. What do we do? What about having hydration? People need water under these circumstances, ready access to it. What about more shading, ventilation, places of that nature? And what about potential cool spaces? I mentioned the parish church where I live. There may be others where people can actually not only get some water, but also get a bit of a break from the heat. And when the heat wave attempts, let's get communicating. Let's remind people what's about, directing people to what they can do about it to cool down, be careful of each other. And if we have to deliver water to different places, this may not be something for everybody. These are just examples of things that might be done. And then you can, when you're looking at the community emergency plan, you think, well, that doesn't apply to us, but that does. Oh, and by the way, there are some other things we should be thinking about because of the nature of our community and the nature of our geography. If we're in a community perhaps where there's a lot of people whose first language isn't English, for instance, what are we thinking about that? How do we communicate things to those individuals in advance, and so on? So everywhere will be different. So the template that we've got is a sort of starter for 10. There's lots of advice in it, but each area will need to, each parish or town council, for example, will need to think about what makes sense where they are. Okay, so in terms of heat waves particularly, we have published some more detail on our Great Collaboration knowledge base. This is just a quick summary of it. Certainly, check the weather and travel warnings. We've had various travel warnings. People saying don't travel by train in the heat wave because apparently above 36 degrees centigrade, train rails aren't very reliable. Bit of a worry, isn't it? But there we go. Turn the heating off, seems a bit obvious. Have we got the fridges working? Does everybody that we know is aware of what they can be doing about it? And we can take care of our friends and neighbours. Refillable bottle of water. Water is going to be obviously a critical factor, and availability of water in any heat wave. Certainly keep out of the sun if we can. Walking the dog, there will be some dogs will say, well, I'm not going out in that. Sometimes we'll get told off by the hand. We're going to stay in here in the cool. Thank you very much. And certainly there are things we can do about using curtains. It seems a bit daft. Usually we pull curtains to keep the heat in. The pull curtains perhaps to keep the sun out. So there's some things that we can be thinking about in detail. So this is the kind of information you would think in terms of if you were circulating around your community. If we're going to get a heat wave, and we are going to get more heat waves, these are the kind of things to be aware of. Don't think the government has sent around anything to every household in the country along this nature for quite some time. So we have to think about doing it for ourselves. Refills. Now, there's a charity set up to reduce the plastic uses. This is something to do with reaction to climate change. People keep using and throwing away plastic bottles. Keep a plastic bottle and then actually refill it from place to place. So to start with, that was very much about reducing plastic, but now very much more about actually availability of water. And this is taken from that charity's webpage. So there are, if we can think about organizations that have public buildings, places that can have the capacity to offer the opportunity for people to refill their bottles with water, let's think about that. And we can also have, they've also got an app where people can have hold of that to see what's happening in their area. There's an example there seeing what Manchester is doing in order to do that. And if we want to become a refill destination through that their national connection onto their app, then there's a process there of dealing with that. So funny enough, an awful lot of the emergencies we're talking about either not enough water or too much water. Water is a very important topic in our lives. So there's something to think about as to where do people in where we live, where can people go and refill their water bottles? Now then, cold water shock. We get it on the news, and it's not just in our nation as well. I think somebody was saying the weekend 40 young people in Paris had died from jumping into rivers and not being and getting into cold water shock, not being able to save themselves. What happens when we're leaping into cold water on a hot day? If we think about we get into a swimming pool for the first time, and the first reaction, it's a bit cold to start with, and we start hyperventilating. But if that stage continues, if we're still getting cold and hyperventilating, the body tends to move the blood to the center of the body to keep us well. That's why we get people go pale with cold and shock. And ultimately, if people aren't saved or can't get out again, your muscles cool and you get what's called swim failure, and we just actually can't swim and save ourselves. That's the sort of medical stages that we go through as individuals jumping into cold water. 47% of accidental drownings occur in the summertime. So there is some safety advice. There's something I've copied there, which is a useful image. Don't just jump straight into unknown water. Again, this is something we need to share with our people in our communities, particularly, of course, if we have a river or a lake or anything like that in our local area. And it may be very appropriate to have signs up around them. If you're going to get in the water, okay, but get in gradually, wearing protective or visible gear if possible. Don't thrash around if you get into difficulties, because actually you won't be able to save yourself. Float on the surface, they say. Float on the surface, so you're getting warmer, so your breathing recovers, and call for help. And if you see so many difficulties, don't jump in yourself, because then you end up in the same situation as they are if you're not careful. Send them something that floats. And never go wild swimming on your own. So this is basically safe advice, which is shared from a number of sources. And we need to think about having that available in our local areas for people. And so that we get less of these very tragic, usually junior fatalities. And the cold water shock there up the top, there's a link to more information about it. Wildlife can also suffer. Local wildlife the ducks don't want to be disturbed by us jumping into where they live. Again, a number of places can put up signs about warnings that be careful of wildlife in these occasions. There's a bit of a controversy in Hampstead Heath. There's some lakes there at Hampstead Heath in London during this recent heat wave, where some places were set aside for public human use, and some places were set aside for wildlife. And blow me, a lot of people are just jumping into the wildlife places and ignoring all the signs. So we can be thinking about wildlife as well when we're thinking about heat waves. We can be thinking about how we support them. Again, there's World Wildlife Fund and Freedom of Produce advice on how we can help out with helping our local wildlife to survive in these occasions. And don't forget, of course, our pets. The dogs that don't want to go for a walk. Same thing applies, water and shade and so forth. Some of this stuff may seem obvious. Some of this stuff may well be obvious, but how do we make sure that everybody in our area knows it? And how do we know that we can provide water and shade when it's required? These are open questions for each place. Okay. The government's Prepare campaign, which I can't remember how I got to hear about it. It hasn't been very well advertised. It goes on about all these different things. It's covering a whole load of other things. So we're looking at other issues, other potential emergencies. The government has produced quite a lot of information on it, and these links will take you through to it all. But the one thing that's not there is food shortages. Obviously, a number of these things, floods, power cuts, heat waves, wildfires even, can actually result in local food shortages. But there's no thought about that in this government's campaign, and no suggestion about how we might prepare in advance for it. Now, there is a website and a connection you can get in touch with called Sustainable Food Places, which is really about local area food partnerships. What can we arrange again in our local area? Who are the food providers? What are the things that we might need? How do we manage things? How do we look forward as well over the longer term as well as the shorter term? Shorter term, yes, we can have food banks. Yes, we can have community fridges. But what about the longer term as well? What about do we need to grow more of our own food? What about new allotments, for example? All of these kind of discussions. So this is something that wasn't and isn't on the government's Compare campaign, but it has something we have put in the community management plan template because we're desperately sure it needs to be in there, seeing as we import about 50% of our food in this nation anyway. So all those links will be there for you when you access these notes when we compile it. Shall I link on one? You can see it. See what happens when I do that. Oh, it's not working. Oh, here it comes. So this is the sort of thing you get from when you're looking at one of those links, and you get all this from government. There's all the list of them. It talks about pollution forecast, talks about who's at risk, talks about actions you can take with information. And that sort of information is there for all of these different topics on this government website. Okay. All right. Oh, where have I gone now? Probably lost my presentation. There it is. So lots of information out there, lots of information to take in, but obviously some of these things will be particularly relevant in our local areas. Some of them will be more national, such as heat waves. Well, this is the last image. I'm jealous of this chap because he's not only has he got some nice cold water on his face, he's got less white hair than I have, but never mind. What about the future then? We're talking about emergency planning. What about water in our area? We know that there are some national debates about we need more reservoirs. What else is going to be happening about that? How can we be sure about our local energy supplies, which affect a lot of the ways that we can live and work? Certainly local energy necessary for communications, potentially also for water supplies. Looking ahead, and I think we're beginning to get together some ideas of what the world might be like, our country might be like in 10 years' time. We begin to gather some thoughts about what kind of general advice we need to be sharing and looking at. And ultimately, of course, we need to be saying, what's the messages that we send out to people? Because at the moment, there's an awful lot of doom and gloom in the media from one side of the debate, on the other about the effects of climate change. We need some more positive messages. And I know the Centre for Sustainable Energy has been well advanced in that as one organisation. So we need to be thinking again about let's make sure that we can have some good times ahead with water and energy and our good friends around us. So as I say, there's a bit there. The presentation and those links will be made available after this meeting. I'll have a quick look at the chats, Graham, but I don't know whether you want to manage any questions. You're muted, Graham.
Thanks. No, Stuart is way ahead of me, so by all means, let me start with Stuart.
Nice, thanks. I think that was a nice little summary. One thing that seems to be missing is air conditioning.
I thought about that.
I must say, I fitted air conditioning here a couple of years ago, and I've been very pleased with it.
Okay.
And I think the government seem to have a downer on it. They don't want people installing air conditioning.
All right.
But I think if you're on using renewables, green energy tariff, or you have solar PV, I think it's a very good option.
Okay. I did read somewhere in the press that the online purchases of air conditioning units has actually rocketed last week or so. I thought about including it, and I thought, well, there's a whole load of things there about which I don't fully grasp, about the finances, about the costs, about the issues around air conditioning. But I'm glad you've mentioned it, because it is it's another option, isn't it? Certainly at a household level.
Well, I think not just for the air conditioning, keeping cool,
Right.
but it also keep you warm in the winter.
Yes.
Let's say if you're using green energy, you're going to reduce your gas consumption.
Yeah.
Well, that's true. Yeah. No, that's sound. Um,
I
okay.
think there's a case to be made, just for those who are not sure, that heat pumps will also churn out cold air. So rather than have heating and air conditioning, you might be better off just putting in a heat pump and doing both with the same device. Certainly, I know that the old village hall that I came from in Somerset held a theatre show last Saturday. So it was very hot. They had 125 people in a room that was, very best designed to cope with them. And there were people putting on opera in a box, so that there were people prancing around the stage and swimming, singing, and lots of heat generated. And the air-to-air heat pumps had no problem at all in coping with that. They were fine. And as you say, they're coming from the roof has got 60 panels of solar panels on it, so they're more or less self-sustaining. So absolutely heat pumps, and I think Stuart's idea is completely right.
I thank you for the link in the chat to the London Community Resilience Toolkit, which looks fascinating. So I think we should be having a look at that, Grim. Dan, you've got your hand up, mate.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I was wanting to. I put some thoughts in the chat around what parish councils might be able to do about kind of extreme heat. I think there's lots they can do about kind of thinking long term about shade planting. Because you're sticking a tree next to a kind of a playground that currently has no shade, and it might cost you 90 quid, but in 30 years' time, it's going to be really kind of valuable, basically. And then another thought was just about kind of, I guess, the public's current poor understanding of what you should actually do in a heat wave. I think we're not very good at it in this country. Lots of people open all the windows, and you suffer through the ravages of the heat of the day, basically. And so, sort of that sort of acting like an Italian behavior that we're not used to yet, and some sort of cheap kind of DIY heat hacks, like putting up bed sheets outside your windows to keep the heat out, all of that stuff. I think parish councils could do a really good job of helping disseminate some of that information.
Right. That's a good point. Yes, and obviously, you don't think of pulling the curtains when it's hot as well as it's cold, but actually, there's some value of it. Deborah, thank you for your note there. Some of those worst affected by heat are in rented accommodation. Yeah, because there are lots of once you start talking about this and looking around it, there are lots of ramifications. What about people who are not putting in these facilities for their residents and tenants? Is that the kind of point you wanted to make, Deborah?
Yeah, and just I didn't realise this was parish councillors. Somebody sent this to me from the Eco Hub, and they sent out some advice on, keeping cool, and some of it was so obviously privileged in the sort of middle class homeowner. You've got a garden, plant a tree, you can put stuff on your outside windows. If you live on the 18th floor of a tower block, well, good luck not dying trying to get to your outside windows, and good luck not dying of the heat as well. And also things like, even, temporary aircon units that even go through a window. Your landlord isn't going to let you cut a hole in the window. Your landlord isn't going to let you install shutters or heat pumps or anything like that. So there are many people for whom, and one of the pieces of advice was swap your bed sheets for linen and bamboo. And it's like, a lot of people, are on bed sheets they got from the charity shop, quite frankly. They can't afford to just rush out and buy some lovely bamboo and linen sheets from John Lewis. And I think, it's just a fact of life that often in both local politics and in environment and all the rest of it, the people who have time to have a think about these things and send out the advice are the privileged. You know, I'm not living in a flat on the 17th floor either, but you know, they are the privileged, and it's quite easy to reach for solutions that would suit them and not think more broadly about what the heck can you do. You know, I live in Maidenhead, and we get the local news from London, and there was a really quite upsetting story of a family in London with a tiny baby living in a high rise flat at the top where all the heat was rising up to, where they couldn't get their flat cool, where they were endless. They couldn't bear to sleep through the night because they didn't know that their baby would survive the heat. And you know, that even cool places, you know, you can't spend the night in the library. And it's sort of, you know, I think more concern needs to be given to the people who are truly going to be affected by this, you know, the vulnerable people, but actually some of those vulnerable people wouldn't be vulnerable outside of a heat wave, but they are specifically affected by the places that they live in.
I think that's right.
Just in terms of like the advice that we put out, to kind of always be mindful, at least of wording it, that this might not be suitable for everybody. You know, if you have this opportunity, take it. Perhaps you can share something, you know, or even just if you've got a spare fan, does somebody else need it? Things like that, where we're constantly thinking about the people who, you know, can't afford to pay over the, you know, I mean, well, I don't think you can actually buy a fan in England at the moment. Or anything approaching a cooling device that would actually get delivered in time for the next heat wave and not in time for Christmas. So, you know, I think there's there's a lot of, you know, sharing opportunities to be found here.
I think that's a great word, isn't it? Sharing,
and you know, the point of community support, as well as finding those vulnerable people in your community, is just finding who has what and who needs what, rather than just necessarily specifically focusing on the vulnerable, because all sorts of things that you know, people who take antidepressants are particularly vulnerable to heat, because some of the antidepressants depress the cooling mechanisms of the body. They wouldn't be considered vulnerable perhaps in other circumstances if that depression is being managed by those drugs. So, you know, they may not present as vulnerable in the same way as the older person might, or a very young child might, or a disabled person who's like very clearly physically disabled might. So I think we do need to be kind of broadly mindful of all the different vulnerabilities in our communities and try and encourage people to share what they can.
Right, really, we've talked, there's a lot of publicity, quite rightly so, about a just transition in response to climate change, because people who are less well off are going to be more vulnerable and more greatly affected. That's bearing up what you're saying. Thanks very much. Joanne?
So two things. One is we need to educate the children, because it seems to be a forgotten thing. Because I was brought up in, you know, that you had to shut the curtains during the day to keep the heat out. So I'm just surprised that people don't sort of, you know, this seems to be reinvented. But I was going to say that our local radio station, they had on about, you know, the heat and all the rest of it. But they were also saying the trouble is that buildings now aren't built to withstand the heat. You know, we're always worried about the cold and all the sort of insulation and all the rest of it. But if you go back to lots of the old cottages and things where they had, you know, 3-foot walls and things, they were quite a constant temperature inside. I'm not concluding upstairs where it was probably quite freezing in the winter, but I mean, they're much cooler, aren't they? And they were actually saying that what we need to be doing is, you know, more insulation to keep the heat out and not to keep the heat in. So it partly goes back to, we need to relook at the building regs and things as well, because they're building these matchbox houses, running them up, you know, really quickly, but they're not necessarily fit for purpose, are they? And building regs always take an age to change. So I just think that needs to be thrown into the pot.
But my perception of how we approach the future is at two levels. Certainly, what I call the horizontal level, what we can do locally, and how we can work better amongst ourselves and share things, as Deborah was pointing out. But also, then occasionally there needs to be a bit of campaigning upwards to get things moved down up there. What we now know, of course, which is beginning to become gradually more apparent, is that there is the spare cash isn't available at government level. So what then is the answer? You know, it's no point saying, there's two things. You can't say, you know, it's somebody else's job. Therefore, why don't I just complain about it? But the other side is, what do we actually do in practical terms, both in terms of campaigning and in terms of, in some cases, finance and so forth. And I think the ways of doing that, we've got a project that we had a presentation for recently from the Isle of Wight, where they're talking about a network of energy batteries around the island that people can actually gather energy, particularly when it's cheaper, and have it available as a resource and they can share with each other. And they had a particular thought that they realised that, of course, some people simply can't afford to buy these batteries, and so they were thinking about how they would cope with that as well. And I was encouraged by that initiative, because I think that's the kind of approach that we need across the country for all different needs and sources as well. How do we do it? How do we get people together? And what about people that actually don't have a lot of money to spare? So I think we're on the same line there. I'm beginning to think that ultimately there may be some kind of, and I'm conscious also that London and very heavily built up areas will have different issues and opportunities as opposed to more rural areas. But I think we still need to be gathering these ideas. People weren't taught it at school for whatever reason, that we need to make sure that they've got that information. Thanks for that, Joan. Stuart.
Yeah, I was just going to say I agree totally with the previous two speakers, Deborah and Joanne. It's not just older buildings. There was a picture I saw in The Guardian fairly recently. There was a new tower block being opened somewhere near the Blackwall Tunnel, and one of the residents had in big letters in one of the windows saying, "Do not buy one of these flats. They are like a furnace."
Good Lord.
And as I say, this was a brand new block, but they were having trouble selling them, and the people who had bought them couldn't offload them just because of overheating.
Right.
But I think there's a lot that could be done with better design. As you said about the building regs, you can build houses in such a way that the sort of south-facing windows, in the winter when the sun's low, they let in lots of nice light and this, that, and the other. As the sun goes higher in the summer, they're actually shaded, so they don't overheat as much. I think we could have a lot more in the way of shutters. And I think shutters on buildings actually look quite attractive. Or even just shades that you pull down.
Right.
Simple.
I know the last Conservative government was having plans to upgrade the business regulations in certain ways. And that was going to go into force last year. Then there was a change of government. And I'm not sure whether the building regs, I mean, you may know the answer to this, Dan, whether the building regs have actually been changed at all in the last 12 months.
Yeah, they have. I'm not sure about in the last 12 months, but the Future Homes Standard has come into force.
Right.
The full standard has come into force, and there is a new section on overheating, and I think it sets out regulations on window size according to the size of the rooms. What it doesn't do, of course, is talk about the kind of external sort of shade. I don't think external shading's included. It doesn't sort of set anything about landscaping, and there's so much you can do for how a development is landscaped, and whether you've got, housing in a sea of black tarmac with no trees, that's going to massively increase your risks. There's also still permitted development rights. It's a travesty that allows people to kind of, subdivide and convert a commercial building into residential, into flats. And there's no controls really on kind of overheating risk, basically. And so you're basically creating sweat boxes, hot boxes.
Right.
It's really, really appalling. So there needs to be some change there.
Yeah. I mean, Dan, you've got the planning desk for the Centre for Sustainable Energy, I believe, yes. So this is very much
a bit wider than that, but yeah.
Okay. I don't mean to run you down.
No, it's all right.
But you were the obvious person for me to ask that question.
Yeah.
What do you think? Well, there's so many changes at number 10 and everywhere else. Whatever. Is there what would you think? How can we actually as lowly individuals help move towards a more sensible design standards. What's the answer?
I mean, I sort of feel like, there's never let a good crisis go to waste. And I sort of feel that, if we have a few more of these kind of heat waves going through, we just need to sort of do a good job of sort of telling those stories of how kind of, extreme heat is affecting people, like that poor family in the top floor flat that you were talking about. I mean, that's just absolutely appalling. So I sort of feel that this summer, the need for adaptation and sort of greater resilience to extreme heat is really it really seems to be cutting through, basically. But I think we can do a good job to support that by kind of, expressing those stories, basically, and joining up with other organisations to put those messages across. That's certainly what we're trying to do.
Mm-hmm. Right. I'll just make a note and gather the stories and share. Yeah. Okay. I begin to get into the habit of making notes to myself in the chat. So, there we go. I know Graham you tend to post the chat with the recordings, don't you, Graham?
I do indeed, and I tend to turn the requests for links and so forth into the links themselves. But mentioning to Dan that he's made a comment about how useful the CCC report is it possible, Dan, you can put the link up there for that particular report? Because when you look at the website, they've got lots and lots and lots of reports to go through.
Sure, have done. Sorry, I thought I had already.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very kind.
So I think how we organise ourselves, wherever it is that we're living, how do we get in touch with people around us in order to prepare at the local level for these things that are coming? We're talking about heat wave, which is going to affect everybody in the country. It is something that if we're talking about town and parish councils in a way that's a straightforward approach, then we're going to be starting from those organisations as a way of getting acts together and getting people to join up with things. Obviously, a lot of places, particularly in London and in other built-up areas, aren't parished, and they don't have that obvious answer. So equally, in some places, there are community organisations and residents associations getting going on this. In the recent bill for local government reorganisation, Maidenhead, there's another one. The National Association of Local Councils was successful in getting the Act to re-emphasise the capacity for having new town and parish councils, obviously with a particular view on urban areas. In many of places where borough councils are disappearing, when Taunton Deane Borough Council disappeared one day, the next day Taunton Town Council appeared. Similar stuff is happening in parts of Essex. Certainly being planned for Cheltenham and in Gloucestershire and other places as well. So in addition to not letting a good crisis go to waste, it may be that we have more obvious community-based organisations in urban areas than we've been used to. I don't know if anybody on this call has got any more thoughts or experiences to share about how people might have already been successfully getting together on a community basis. Perhaps, Deborah, what's happening in Maidenhead in terms of people working with each other?
It's me and my friend Michelle so far, and another friend who might get involved, because I tried all the different routes. I looked at communities prepared. Shockingly, from the Thames, from Richmond down to Tame, there are no community prepared flood groups actually listed, which seems a big surprise to me. Although I do know that some of the parishes do have flood wardens, they're just not listed on that particular mapping. I couldn't find anything. I went round and round in circles via the Resilience Forum, the local council website, background communities prepared, all over the place. Could find nothing. Contacted the local councillor in charge of emergency planning. He knew nothing. Said he'd get back to me in April. Still waiting. wrote a letter to the local paper saying we really kind of need to do this. No responses on that. Shared a blog where I explained why it's important. No responses on that. So I have actually taken a somewhat tangential approach and set up a neighbourhood watch area for my street on the basis that this sort of comes under safety and security of your neighbourhood. And I've only just done that just recently. It took some time to negotiate that website system as well, and also for them to work out whether the previous coordinator still existed. And I'm actually planning to go out at some point this week, clearly next week might be out of the thing, to just knock on some people's doors and ask them what they think and whether they want to get involved, and start at a really, really hyper local level where, you know, actually, I think this rests. I mean, obviously, parish councils, I think, are one of the main kind of vectors for this planning. But as I say, in Maidenhead, we don't have that. And just in the neighbourhood watch area that I'm looking at, there are 300 homes. That's just in one. It's an avenue that used to be full of big old Edwardian houses back in the heyday of Maidenhead, and now there are lots of little developments and closes and side roads. So that includes blocks of flats and side roads and all the rest of it. So it's a blend of very big houses full of very rich people and very tiny houses full of not so rich people and some flats. So it will be an interesting exercise to do, to just knock on doors and talk to people and see whether they're interested in getting involved, what part of it they're interested in, whether they're even kind of, I mean, I'm hoping that the heat wave last week and the one to come next week will have sort of made people think more about what we maybe need to do as communities. But it's very much around, you know, looking at those risks of, in that people's emergency briefing, the sort of inevitable end of it, the kind of the stick rather than the carrot was societal breakdown. And it's like, well, does it have to break down? If we build it up now in a way that supports everybody, not the rich and the powerful, could we maybe not have vigilantes and, you know, people kind of ram raiding Sainsbury's with their 4x4 to take all the loo roll? I mean, you know, that is what it will come to, but it doesn't have to come to that if we've already kind of created, if we've brought those people in to protect their community rather than just their family, then, you know, we can actually maybe avert societal breakdown. I mean, I think there will, you know, I don't think we should sugarcoat it. I think if we carry on the way we're going, there will be deaths. There will be deaths from starvation. There will be deaths from flood. There will be deaths from fire. There'll be deaths from heat waves and cold and all the rest of it. But we don't have to cause those deaths ourselves, and we can help to prevent them if we work together. And I think it could be a positive message that if you look and do that asset looking, I looked at my particular ward, and, you know, we've got a doctor's, we've got a chemist, we've got several pubs, we've got a sailing club, we've got somebody who hires out tents for festivals, you know, and it's like, actually, as a community, we probably could put together what we need. Maybe, you know, we could maybe get through this together. So maybe thinking of our strengths rather than kind of focusing on the downside is the way to go. So that's the sort of messaging that I'm also friends with somebody who lives in Tooting in London, who's heavily involved in the environment movement, transition towns and all the rest of it. And they are more actively working towards an emergency plan in Tooting. And in London, the London Communities Prepared side, there's some grant that you can get to help you develop a community plan, emergency plan. But she's talking to people like the funeral directors, and realize that as well as their agreement to hold the bodies should it come to it, that they actually have people who are trained in dealing with grief and tricky situations and people who are traumatized, that, you know, that's exactly what their staff do day in, day out. It's like, you know, deal with people who are going through difficult times. So it's not just the practicalities, it's about finding those people with the skills as well. So that's where we're at in Maidenhead, which is not very far because we don't have a parish. The central 7 wards of Maidenhead are not parished, so we don't have that to rely on. But, you know, in my bigger plan list, once I've kind of tested the water locally, I've got a whole list of local organisations to see if I can bring on board. And I mean, I really wish the council would just pick up the baton, but I mean, there's only so much prodding you can do before you really actually have to say, it's actually an emergency. We can't just wait another 10 years for you to get your act together.
Let's get on with it. And Deborah, you're a star because you're saying all the things that we've been saying, but saying it so much better. And Dan's nodding as well. what a great idea, neighborhood watch. Everybody's heard of the neighborhood watch.
Well, and it's sort of it's a name you can trust, you know. It's like people think, oh yeah, that she's got a right to knock on my door and ask my opinion about this. So that's why I thought, you know, there's somebody to, and you know, they're very much more now than just, you know, curtain twitching and nosy neighbours. There's a lot of work that they do around loneliness and support and supporting vulnerable people, and they will have access to that information around who is the vulnerable people in their community. And it is at a very local level, so that it gives you that kind of, as you say, you know, as a parish council, you don't necessarily want to hold that sensitive information, but actually through the neighbourhood watch, you might have a vector to sort of find, you know, specific areas. I mean, obviously the coverage is patchy, so it's not, you know, everything, but there will be neighbourhood associations and street WhatsApps and things like that to fill the gaps. So that's where we're at here, which is not very far, but given that it's 3 people trying to do it and hold down a full-time job.
Well, it only needs one person. It only needs one person to start something, Deborah.
Well, you've got to try, haven't you? You've got to absolutely try, and if you can't make it work, you can't make it work. So,
well, I put my email address in the chat. Do please let us know how you're getting on, because that we need to share this. Dan, you got your hand up.
Just first of all, absolute hats off to Deborah. It's great to hear what you're doing. It sounds brilliant. I just wanted to say I've put in a link to Shade the UK, which is a kind of charity talking about kind of heat resilience and adaptation and pressing for policy change there. And we're going to try and sort of get in touch with them, because obviously we're a charity talking about kind of energy justice, basically, and climate change, and also fuel poverty. And so they're coming from the opposite direction, talking about kind of heat insecurity and justice. So if we get anywhere on that, I'll get in touch with you and see if we can sort of, you know, get together and press for some improvements, basically, because I feel like the current government reaction is sort of woeful and sort of absent, really. In terms of
you wait for government, you wait a long time, and because they've got other fish they're frying it just at the moment. Yeah, that website, I had a quick look at it, Stuart. That's very much addressing some of the things you were talking about in terms of architectural design. So that's interesting. And the other thing that's coming to my mind, all of this, is that our job at the Great Collaboration is joining all this stuff up, because there are people doing different things which are very relevant to our collective future. I had been, it's back to water again. I had this image we started of us being on the surfboard on the crest of a wave which is the climate change and wave. But now there's lots of other people on their surfboards coming up next to us, or we're coming up next to them, because obviously Centre for Sustainable Energy has been going for quite some time already. And so we will join up those kind of things. The other thing is about, which I think something Jen mentioned about things we get taught at school. How do we get the information out in a way that interests people and without actually scaring the pants off them and saying they're rushing down to the supermarket? Dan, I'm thinking of getting some people together, probably in October, we're all at the same coalface in a way. We're all looking at what needs to be done, what can be done, how do we share information about it, and see if we can get some good language going together. We need a wellspring of good language. I mean, the sort of, you know, net zero slanging matches we get on the media, you know, it's not helping anything very much. Doesn't matter which side of the divide you're on. I'm told, is it net zero week next week, Dan? Is that something that's somebody's told me?
I'm not sure. Maybe it is, but I think I've missed it if it is.
Right. Well, I'd certainly missed it. Yeah.
I'll put the link in because it's very definitely on.
Yeah. I think there are these resilience forums. Deborah's left a message about those. There are these resilience forums around it, but we can't assume that things are going to be done for us by other people. My good friend Jules tends to say, nobody's coming to save us. And I think if we can be finding 1 or 2 people with us to actually get interested in this at a local level, if nobody else is doing it, and find out, it's a bit lonely if it's just one person, find out what's happening, what we could have, what's available. I think that's the message that we're all wanting to carry. And that's all good stuff. Well, it's 1 o'clock, and I think we've had some great stuff, much better stuff from the attendees than from the poor old presenter who was just borrowing stuff from other people. It's great to have these sessions and great to have examples and put together, and even better that it's recorded and kept for other people. Graham, was there anything else anybody wanted to say today before we come to a close?
Yeah, I had a question really. I was just sort of thinking about extreme heat and heat waves, and just thinking about the role parish councils play in terms of how they manage their land. You know, like all the sort of green land within your sort of town or whatever, and sort of managing that for adaptation and heat, and thinking about the kind of the thing about the albedo effect. So if you change the surface of a piece of public land, it changes the temperature it gets to, and sort of tree planting, and just the degree to which you have money to do that, and then also the degree to which you've thought about how you manage the land that you look after to reduce heat effects, and also think about kind of fire breaks and all the rest of that stuff, because it feels to me that's an area that you parish councils could really do something about. But I don't know what the barriers are to that.
Well, the barriers in general, I don't think there's any specific barriers. I'm pretty sure that there hasn't been a message out with town and parish councils about managing landscape for heat, so that can be improved on. We can get that story out. Obviously, a lot of parishes do tree planting anyway, but not necessarily trees for shade. They'll plant trees elsewhere for other reasons. So that's a sound point. The sort of things that get in the way at parish councils is parish councils get stuck in a rut, and they just do things in the way they always did, and then they wonder why they don't get any new councillors at elections. I think we say that you've got all the statutory powers you need to do these things. Certainly, if it's your own property, you can do things about that. Funding it isn't much of an excuse, because there are ways you can find money if it's really that important. And in any case, as someone's already said today, tree planting is not actually terribly expensive. So we can do those things. So I think that the bit that's new, Dan, is getting parishes to think about heat when they're managing their property. And that I've made a note about that. That's a good idea. It's a good one. Yeah.
Well, we've had some. Thank you so much for what actually turned into being a very fascinating discussion, because as you thought, it would lead to lots of ideas and places where they are doing it and getting it right that we can all learn from. So much appreciated. Thank you very much.
It's been a great pleasure, and thanks everybody. And what's on? Do we know what's on next week yet, Graham? Or?
If I were organised, I would take huge pleasure in telling you what's coming next week. But since I'm not, I'm not.
Okay. I'm sorry I put you on the spot. There you are.
We'll find something, but as yet,
I have a funny feeling this last conversation is going to be mysteriously missing from the recorded tape. Anyway, there you go. Okay, certainly right.
Thank you all very much for coming, and I hope to see you again next week.
Thank you.
Cheers. All the best.
Take care, all. Bye bye.